We have another correction. This is part 12, not 11.
And the last one was part 11.
Yeah. Okay. Darlin back in her room.
Okay. When Darlin finally got back to the other room, it was 8 p.m. She only brought a couple of presents and a few cards. She did not get a chance to open yet. While letting a steam build, Darlin sat up on the edge of the bed telling Disco about the party and opening the last few cards. When she opened her grandma's card, she realized that the writing was the same as the handwritten copy of the Wizard of Oz book she found up in the tower. She looked across the room at the oil can and said to Disco, "We have to go put that back tonight." When she got undressed, she switched her thinking from the events of the party back to the events that happened before the party. The more she thought about it, the more she wanted to investigate. Darlin didn't care what Kaylee and Willow thought. Her grandmother was a witch, and she was going to prove it.
Oh yeah, that's it. I added in the story where she told her friends about all the stuff that happened to her because they were in that little witch's coven with her. Go on.
After looking at the handwriting again, she knew that the handwriting that her grandmother gave her today was the exact same as the handwriting in the Witches of Oz dated 1867. The signature combined with the cauldron, the witch's outfit, and 10 other things that have happened in the last 2 days were the reasons Darlin was going to sneak out. When Darlin was done her shower and steam, she laid on her bed with her hair wrapped up in a towel and another one around her body. Darlin liked to towel dry slowly. She would never wipe the towel all over her to get dry. She had been doing it ever since she was a little girl. And normally she would paint her nails. Yeah, I thought that. Or do her daily skin routine. But tonight, all she did was lay there thinking about all the weird things that had happened. Like slides flashing away on a slide machine went the pictures in her head. She changed back into the fairy clothes she had on earlier. Then she looked through the room a bit for a flashlight she could use later instead of the torch. Darlin remembered, oh yeah, she forgot the torch upstairs. She would have to remember when she brought back the oil can. When she didn't find her flashlight, she buzzed the intercom to have someone bring one up. While she waited for someone to bring up a flashlight, Darlin got under her covers to make it look like she was going to bed. After about 20 minutes, there was a knock on the door. Darlin yelled out from under the covers, "Come in!" The door opened and in came Thurston. Before he was even through the door, he was already apologizing. "I'm sorry, dear, that it took so long. Most of the servants have the night off, and we are having trouble getting some of the bigger trucks off the grounds."
Thurston has like a really deep voice.
Oh.
It's okay.
Sorry. No, I can try. They're simply too heavy, and some have sunk down to the axles, Darlin replied. "Oh, no problem. I was just laying here getting ready for bed." "I have your flashlight. What did you need this for? Is there something I can help you with?" asked Thurston as he waddled his way toward the bed. "No, I just want it. I had a bad dream last night, and to tell you the truth, the castle is kind of creepy," explained Darlin. "No need to be scared. We have top-notch security. There's new batteries in here if you need anything. Just ring." "Good night, Miss Darlin," said Thurston, giving the flashlight to Darlin. "Good night, Thurston," she replied. When Thurston turned to leave, he paused for a moment halfway to the door. After he left, Darlin noticed she left the oil can out in plain view. Maybe that's why he paused. Maybe he recognizes it, she thought. After about 10 minutes, she gathered up the oil can, put on her new sash, and put Disco inside it. The sash went across her body like a Miss America sash, but she had a few pockets inside of it. There was 2 pouches at the bottom for Disco. One was mesh so that she could use it in the summer. In the second pouch, she placed the oil can. Beside the empty flashlight and her cell at the other pocket in the sash were empty. She went to the door, locked it. She headed over to the bookshelf and pulled the book back, and the secret entrance revealed itself. Out of the corner of her eye, she seen that she had left her grandmother's card on the bed. She went over and grabbed it. She would compare the writing with the book when she went up in the tower. Disco let out a bark from inside the sash, and Darlin hushed her. She pointed the flashlight down the passageway and turned it on. She could see the passage more clearly now because of the white light of the flashlight. Now, a little more familiar with the tunnel system, she made her way quickly to the fork in the road. She thought there is no way she was going upstairs first. She might have to take the slide back down again, and with her luck, she would probably land on her sleeping grandmother. She laughed as she pictured landing on her, then decided to take the far right tunnel to the gold room instead. When she got there, she could still see the orange glow from the fire burning in the room. Knowing better this time, she knelt down and put her arm in the lower hole so that she wouldn't get stuck. A few seconds later, a secret entrance opened. The smoke from the cauldron billowed out of the room and out the exhaust vents in the passage as it did before. Darlin shined the flashlight in and around the room. The white light lit up the bricks brightest gold she had ever seen. It was hard for her to look at, so she quickly shut off the flashlight and entered the spherical room. When the secret door closed itself behind her, she placed Disco on the floor and went to the table with the purple and green test tubes. She started her investigation by looking at the spell book. Hi, darling. She turned the page and read Cyclone Ride. Darlin skimmed down the page and seen the ingredients list for a spell. She shook her head and took a picture with her cell and then turned a few pages over. This disbelief was called invention. This spell was called invention. Darlin shook her head in disbelief. She couldn't believe it. Not only was her grandmother a Wizard of Oz freak, this was an authentic spell book she was looking at, and her grandmother was an honest-to-God witch. Darlin turned around and took a picture of the covered globe. She dared not peek under it. Carefully, Darlin walked around the cauldron and read a spell that was placed out of place, the easel or podium or whatever it was called. The spell was called Vanity. Darlin, very curious about this, took time to read the entire spell. She was shocked to discover that hair from 16-year-old was one of the ingredients. Thinking about it for a moment, she pulled out her grandmother's card and read it over. It said that she would have to wait until her actual birthday for her present, but it would be worth waiting for. Darlin stepped back. She realized this spell was... Oh, no, don't touch it. Darlin stepped back. She realized this spell was for her. Vanity. She couldn't think how it would work or what it would do, but the one thing she did know was her grandmother was one scary lady, and it could not be good. Going over to the old china cabinet, she began to go over some of the labels on the bottles and bags, taking pictures of the most interesting. As she rifled through bottles, she came across one labeled Victoria's 16th. Almost dropping it as she read, she caught it, placed it on the cabinet, took its picture, and then put it back. Then she thought, maybe her grandma was just a crazy old woman who liked to play witch, or maybe she thought she was a witch but really wasn't. If she had Darlin's mother's hair from when she was 16 and used back then on her, she was okay because her mom was okay and living a great life. With this line of thinking, Darlin would have nothing to worry about. Feeling a little bit better, she turned around and went over to the black silk curtains. Darlin reached up and split the curtains apart, revealing the Tin Man statue. She studied him more closely this time. Looking at his facial features, she realized this was a very lifelike statue. She heard it ticking and realized that it was coming from within the Tin Man's chest. Darlin took her hand and made a fist, then banged on the Tin Man's chest. Bong. There was a loud, empty echo, just like in the movie. Darlin banged 3 more times. Bong, bong, bong. With a hollow sound comparable to a bell, suddenly she heard the Tin Man squeak, "Oil can!" Darlin was startled. She jumped back, but for some reason she wasn't that scared. She approached him again and confirmed that she was not crazy or imagining it either earlier. When his eyes were following her in the room before the party, Darlin took a big step to the left and watched as the eyes followed. Her eyes seemed to smile at the possibilities. She then took a step to the right and seen his eyes move back. Almost okay, where am I? Almost in disbelief, she whispered to the statue, "Did you say oil can? Do you want me to oil you?" The eyes seemed to light up and his jaw moved slightly as he squeaked, "Yes." The sound of his rustled metal lips squeaked together made Disco scared and run across the room. Darlin turned to her and motioned Disco to come back over. Then she pulled the oil can out of the sash. Darlin stood up on the black small wooden box in which he was displayed on. She began to oil the sides of his jaw, lips, and mouth. By the time Darlin went to oil the other side of the Tin Man's face, the Tin Man began to work his mouth free. Thank you, he squeaked, then continued. "I've been rusted for over 100 years. Darlin couldn't believe what she was seeing or hearing. She thought her eyes must be playing tricks on her. Darlin asked, "How is this happening? How are you real? I don't understand." "Keep oiling my joints and I'll tell you, Darlin," pleaded the Tin Man. Darlin's jaw dropped when she heard his name. She asked, "How do you know my name?" As she continued to oil his joints, first oiling the rest of his face, then starting on his neck. "Darlin, I know everything about you. I'm friends with your grandmother Dorothy, who is stuck in a desolate Oz," gasped the Tin Man, moving his jaw and neck around. "My grandmother? What the heck's going on?" Darlin interrupted. "Yes, your grandmother. You really didn't think that wicked old witch was your grandma, did you?" "Dorothy needs us. They all need us. Oz is in trouble," said the Tin Man. After Darlin oiled all his joints, he began to work his joints by moving as much as he could. He stepped off the box he had been frozen on and motioned for more oil, pointing to his knees. After a little bit more oiling on his elbows, the Tin Man lowered his axe and made a very gratified expression on his face. "I think you should sit down," he said. Darlin took a seat on the black wooden box that the Tin Man had been frozen on. She listened to him, tried to inform her as best as he could. It was all very confusing to Darlin. But as she sat there listening to him tell her all about Oz and her grandmother, everything she'd seen and learnt slowly was starting to make sense. Darlin learned that the lady posing as her grandma was really the Wicked Witch of the South, the last of 3 triplets that terrified Oz for many years. After the events that took documented in the movie, Dorothy used the ruby slippers to visit Oz for many years. Dorothy basically grew up into a beautiful young lady in both the lands. After many years of deep and powerful friendship, the Scarecrow and her fell deeply in love. The movie, it did not show this, but after the melting of the Wicked Witch of the West, it wasn't just the broomstick that they had brought to the wizard. They also collected the spell books of both the Wicked Witch of the West and the Wicked Witch of the East and gave them to the wizard. They were stored safely in the great archives of the Emerald City under strict guard. Dorothy and the Scarecrow were eventually married in the Emerald City by their good friend the wizard. Dorothy knew the ruby slippers were capable of all too more magic than she was capable of. Dorothy and Scarecrow spent their honeymoon up in the tallest tower in the Emerald City going through the spellbooks. They were searching for a way to bring him along with her back to Kansas. Dorothy really wanted nothing more than to bring her new husband back with her to Kansas, so that Scarecrow could finally meet Annie M and Uncle Henry. The Wicked Witch of the West book was not much use to them. It was just a gathering of different spells. But they learned a great deal from the Wicked Witch of the East spell books. The Wicked Witch of the East spell book was a lot more scientifically done. It contained dates showing a series of trial and error experiments. The witch's goal that she was trying to reach was to be able to bring objects as well as multiple people through the portal between Kansas and Oz. In one of the witch's early experiments, she had documented one big regret. She accidentally brought a man to Oz who happened to have his hot air balloon caught into the eye of one of her many twisters. This man was the wizard, who never actually knew how he had got to Oz. After careful examination of the diary portion of her spell book, Dorothy learned that her neighbor, Miss Gulch, was really the Wicked Witch of the East. She had been using the ruby slippers to go back and forth from Kansas to Oz for over 23 years. The last spell in the book was called Cyclone Riding. The spell consists soil of different land, including a wand as well as the ruby slippers. After reading this, Dorothy concluded that it wasn't just dumb luck that brought her to Oz in the first place. It was Miss Gulch. She must have been very mad that Toto had got away from her that day on the bike. So when she went home, she decided who better to test her spell on than her little annoying neighbor Dorothy Gale and her little dog too. From reading the spell, Dorothy knew how the witch had did it. The Wicked Witch of the East would have threw soil from Oz up into the air, suspending it in midair by swirling her wand around. Starting with small circles but quickly moving up to bigger circles, she would have turned the hand full of soil into a twister. Then, clicking her heels together and picturing Dorothy's ranch, she was able to bring her up into the twister and through the portal, landing her in Munchkin Land. Her only mistake was that she should have only thought of Dorothy and Toto. By thinking of the house she had taken on too much. The house was more than she could handle. As you know from the movie, it landed on her, causing her death. Dorothy realized that after her first meeting with the Wicked Witch of the West in Munchkin Land, when Glenda had sent her off, she must have went to her sister's castle and taken her dead sister's spell book. Dorothy knew that there was no magic in our world. She seen Miss Gulch turn into the witch in the Twister on her first trip to Oz. She performed a series of test flights bringing magical items from Oz, like the talking flowers in Munchkin Land. She learned that when they went through the portal to Kansas, they lost their magic and just became ordinary flowers. She also learned that when they went back to Oz, they became magical again. Eventually, she built up the nerve and brought the Scarecrow through the portal. When they reached Kansas, he had already turned into a normal man. After meeting Auntie Em and Uncle Henry, he obtained a job as a professor at the University of Kansas, and they had a baby girl and named her Victoria. At first, they did not want to bring a baby girl through the Twister to the land of Oz. Dorothy was very protective of her daughter and a very good mother. On Victoria's 4th birthday, they finally brought her to Oz to meet all their long-awaited friends. At the time, Dorothy and the Scarecrow had been away from Oz for over 4 years. They did not know that the last of the 3 triplet witches, the Wicked Witch of the South, had broken into the archives in the Emerald City and stole her sister's spell books. The Wicked Witch of the South had studied and learned how to use the cyclone spell. She plotted and waited for Dorothy's return so she could steal the ruby slippers to get her final revenge. Dorothy, feeling very safe in the towers of the Emerald City, took a shower, leaving the ruby slippers on her bed. The Wicked Witch of the South snuck in her room, disguised as a cleaning lady, and stole the ruby slippers. Not knowing what to do, Dorothy and the Scarecrow, along with their 2 best friends, the Tin Man and the Lion, used a talking puddle to locate the witch who was in Munchkin Land. The Scarecrow stayed with his daughter, and the other 3 traveled to Munchkin Land to try and retrieve the ruby slippers. Upon arriving in Munchkin Land, they had seen that they were too late. The Wicked Witch of the South had already started a cyclone spell. The lion, with such bravery, charged at her, but was knocked unconscious by a blow from the witch's wand. She magically formed a rain cloud above the Tin Man, causing him to instantly rust. Dorothy barely escaped behind a munchkin hut as the witch was casting fireballs in her direction. She must have tripped and hit her head because she woke up hours later and everything in Oz was different. The munchkins were all missing, and here was no sign of the Tin Man or Lion. The Wicked Witch had kidnapped them all along with part of the Yellow Brick Road. There was no magic left in Oz, and all the talking trees and flowers had wilted away, and the sky had turned dark gray. I need a drink. When Dorothy finally made it back to the Emerald City, she learned her husband had turned into nothing more than a bag of hay. Everything in the whole land of Oz has simply lost its magic. Dorothy, along with her 4-year-old daughter, were stuck in a magicless Oz, never aging and uncertain of what was to come. Okay, take a break.
Yeah.